This video will go over Part E of the Google Sheet activity, Spreadsheets and Graphs. We're still going over different ways to answer filtering questions, and I'm going to show you the method of using a pivot table. We're going to go back to the Census at School 1 sheet, but please make sure to remove any filters that are on this sheet. So down in the Census at School 1 sheet, click on your rectangle and just make sure you've taken off all the filters. You don't want to be working with data that is already filtered. So a pivot table is a summarization tool which can, among other things, sort, count, total, or average data for one or more strata. So basically what you're going to have is variables down the rows and variables along the columns, and you can summarize things like breaking down the data into males and females, and then breaking down males and females into different ages, and then looking for what would be the average height for each of them. So you get a whole bunch of information from pivot tables. We are going to analyze how certain variables are related to each other. So first of all, highlight all the data by clicking on that rectangle, which highlights all the data, and from the data menu, select Pivot Table. And it's going to ask, do you want to do it in a new sheet or an existing sheet? Just click a new sheet, and this is what you get so far. Your rows go down this way, your columns go this way, and the values go in the middle, and you have your pivot table editor. So you'll see a blank table with a new sheet. Yours will probably say Pivot Table 1. I've been experimenting with this for a bit, so mine says Pivot Table 6. I'll just change that to Pivot Table 1. On the right, you'll see the Pivot Table Editor, which we're going to use to select our data in strata. So anytime you want to put variables in the rows, you're going to add rows. Anytime you want to put variables in the columns, you're going to add columns. Anytime you want to add a value to one of those variables, so for instance, if you want to average the heights, that would be what the values are. Rows and columns are just for splitting up the variables, and values are for actually making calculations. So average, sum, standard deviation, which we'll talk about later on, mean, things like that, median. So next to rows, the first thing we're going to do is click Add, and you're going to select Gender. So what that does is it's telling the pivot table that we want to split our data into males and females. You'll see that there is no information yet. When we want information about that, we need to add a value. So under values, we're going to say we want values about the gender. The automatic one that pops up is just count A. And remember, the A just means it's the count of everything that was answered. So it does not include the titles, males and females. So it's just a count. So this is just saying that there are 545 females in the data set and 455 males for a total of 1,000. That is the default one that will pop up, which is the count. That is if it is qualitative data. So qualitative means if it's word data like males and females, that's the default way. If your data is quantitative, so for instance, if we were to have done age instead of gender, age is quantitative, and the default would be the sum. So just keep in mind, but we can change that if we want to. These are all the different things that you can calculate through the values. So the sum, count A, unique counts, we might do averages, mean, median, standard deviation you're going to learn about later. Those are the main ones we're going to be doing. Now we're going to split the males and females into whether they're left-handed, right-handed, or ambidextrous. So to split a variable into different strata, we're now going to use columns. So next to columns, you're going to click Add, and you're going to select Handed. And now what it does is it breaks down the males and females into whether they're ambidextrous, left-handed, right-handed, and then total. So like this number here means 42 males are left-handed. This number here would mean there are 833 right-handed people, and that's including males and females. We're going to make a graph now, and so highlight cells B2 to D4, B2 to D4, and we're going to make a column chart. And we don't want a stacked one, we want one that looks like it's the multiple. So instead of stacked, we're just going to click the first column chart. And different colors, that's okay. And what we have now is showing the different handedness. So your variable would be handedness, and the strata for each. So each handedness is broken down into females and males. So we've got some labeling problems, obviously, but these here would be, so your variable would be handedness, and your strata would be gender. So let's clean this up. Under Customize, Chart Axis and Title. The title is going to be Distribution of Handedness by Gender. And the handedness, the first one you write here, so the distribution of handedness, that is the variable which is going on the x-axis. And when you say by gender, that means the strata, so that means how are you dividing up each of these. We're dividing them up into males and females. And the horizontal axis title is not going to be gender, it's going to be handedness. And the vertical axis title is going to be frequency. And you can move the legend if you want. Remember, under legend here, you can decide where you want to put it. So if you want it over to the right, like this, top, bottom, anywhere you want. You can change the colors, it doesn't matter. But after that, what we're going to do is to paste it into a new sheet titled Charts 2. So we're going to open up a new sheet. We're going to title it Charts 2. And we're going to copy and paste that into here. Now if you wanted to change your variable and your strata, and we wanted to show males and females here, and then break the males and females into their different handedness, you don't need to make a new chart. What you will do is in the chart editor, and if it's not showing, you can just double click the graph and you'll get the chart editor. Under the setup tab, you're going to check, or in this case uncheck, switch rows and columns. So what you get is now your variable is gender and your strata is handedness. So our variable is showing males and females, and each are being split into their handedness. And just change things here. So this is now going to be distribution of gender by handedness. And the horizontal axis title will be gender. And we can copy and paste that into the Charts 2. Oops. There you go. Alright, so let's get rid of this graph. We don't need that anymore. We're going to go back to working in your pivot table. If by some chance you lose your pivot table editor, you can just click on anywhere in the pivot table and it'll bring it back. Now, next to values, we're going to cross out gender. So under values, we're going to cross out gender. It gets rid of all that data. So instead, we're going to add, and we're going to add reaction time. And it's summarized by sum by default because reaction time is quantitative. The sum of the reaction time isn't really that interesting to us. What we're going to do is summarize by average. So what that is showing us is comparing males and females and whether they're right-handed, left-handed, or ambidextrous, and what their average reaction time would be. So you can see here that males have a slightly lower reaction time than females. You can see that right-handed people have a slightly lower reaction time to left-handed people. Ambidextrous people have a bigger reaction time. And the people with the lowest reaction time are left-handed females. They have the best reaction time. Now, one thing you need to know about graphs is every time you change your pivot table or even any kind of filtering, anytime you do that, your graphs are going to change as well. So, for instance, if we were to have left this graph in here, where we were comparing oops, the distribution of gender, sorry I spelled it wrong, distribution of gender by handedness. If we were to have left that graph there, taken out the gender, and then added in that reaction time and summarized it by average. So this graph changes automatically, but over here these graphs also now change to reaction time, even though you copied and pasted them over here. And that's one downfall you have when you don't start things fresh, when you just make changes to things. So making changes to things as you go have advantages because it saves you time from starting from scratch, making a brand new pivot table each time, but every time you make a change, it's going to change your graphs. So in that case, what you're better off doing is making a screenshot. So if you were to have done this, let me just change that title because that's just annoying to me. So if you were to take a screenshot of this graph, if you know you're going to be changing things, you could take a screenshot rather than copying it and pasting it. And paste that into here. Right there. There's the copied, that's the screenshotted one. That's the original one. Now if you come back and you change the values to, oops, handedness and average them, oops, sorry, not handedness, reaction time, and did average. So you can see over here that this one is changed, but the screenshotted one hasn't. So that is something to keep in mind. That concludes part E. Part F is just giving you some questions to try on your own. You can watch the video if you get stuck. It's just going to be going over the answers. Because there are so many different ways to answer them, I'll just be showing you one method.